Right, so the situation in Rafah and throughout the Gaza Strip continues to get ever more dire as further attacks are committed against them by Israel, completely in violation of the International Court of Justice orders put in place as they continue to examine the plausible case for genocide demonstrated against them by South Africa. Just 9 days remain until Israel are supposed to report to the ICJ to show how they have implemented those interim orders, and instead all that is happening is Israel carrying on and completely ignoring those orders. So for the sake of the people of Rafah, with nowhere else to turn, nowhere else to run, and every other nation on the planet still even now ignoring what is happening there, South Africa are once again stepping in, turning to the ICJ and have petitioned them for emergency orders, if they have the power to deliver, before the IDF move into Rafah on foot with everything that could mean for the people there. Right, so the situation in Gaza continues to deteriorate and war crimes continue to be committed as Israel moves in ever closer on Rafah on the border with Egypt. For example, yesterday, just north of Rafah in Khan the Nasser Hospital had its northern wall demolished and its warehouses torched. No safe corridor was provided for the 350 patients inside, and as they were ordered to evacuate, people leaving were shot by snipers. Cast your mind back to the beginning of this attack on Gaza when Israel said they didn't target hospitals. Do you remember that? Lies then and lies now, except their lies have lethal consequences for innocent people, and they no longer care anymore whether people believe them or not. You can hardly say they are targeting Hamas here, can you? But once finished in Khan Yunis, next there comes Rafah, hit with airstrikes again. Half the population of Gaza is there now. And where innocent people were always able to flee ahead of the IDF before, there's nowhere left to go now. And still our politicians sit around like gormless idiots doing nothing except arming the regime, committing all the destruction. South Africa took Israel to court already for this, and the plausible case for them committing genocide has been satisfied to the point it will now be judged on its merits, but that could take years. It surprised the world when the ICJ so overwhelmingly came down on South Africa's side, on the side of Palestine, in passing those provisional orders to prevent the killing of civilians, to stop the military killing civilians, to punish incitement to commit genocide, to provide aid and humanitarian assistance, to prevent the destruction of evidence, and to report to the ICJ within a month of the order being given on all measures taken to meet these orders, as was put on Israel to do and to abide by. Well, Israel broke them within 2 hours of them being set out, and they've ignored them ever since. They have 9 days left to report to the ICJ on how they've met these orders. February 23rd is the due date. I doubt they'll bother somehow. Well, knowing the people of Gaza have nowhere else to go now, and seeing Israel blatantly ignore the ICJ so far, arrogant as they are, and smug in the knowledge that someone will always excuse them, the nation equivalent of a spoilt brat as Israel seems to be, South Africa are the only ones seemingly interested in meting out some life-saving discipline to them. They have returned to the ICJ and have petitioned them to invoke emergency orders to save the people of Rafah. I've picked out the most relevant parts here. By way of an order dated 26th of January 2024, the International Court of Justice indicated 6 provisional measures against Israel. In making the order, the court ruled that there is urgency in the sense there is a real and imminent risk that irreparable prejudice will be caused to the rights found by the court to be plausible before it gives its final decision. There has since been a significant development in the situation in Gaza requiring the court's urgent attention. On Friday 9th of February 2024, the Office of the Prime Minister of the State of Israel issued the following announcement. It is impossible to achieve the goal of the war of eliminating Hamas by leaving 4 Hamas battalions in Rafah. On the contrary, it is clear that intense activity in Rafah requires that civilians evacuate the areas of combat. Therefore, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ordered the IDF and the security establishment to submit to the Cabinet a combined plan for evacuating the population and destroying the battalions. Despite strong denunciation by the international community, including by some of Israel's closest allies, the Israeli Prime Minister reiterated in an interview broadcast on Sunday 11th of February 24 that victory is within reach. We're going to do it. We're going to get the remaining Hamas terrorist battalions in Rafah, which is the last bastion, but we're going to do it. Thereafter, on Sunday evening, Rafah was subjected to an intense, unprecedented Israeli military assault with an ongoing threat of yet further intensification of the assault, including by way of an Israeli ground invasion. Rafah, normally home to 280,000 Palestinians, currently houses, primarily in makeshift tents, more than half of Gaza's population, estimated at approximately 1.4 million people, approximately half of them children. They fled to Rafah, pursuant to Israeli military evacuation orders from homes and areas that have been largely destroyed by Israel. As the International Committee of the Red Cross has made clear, there is no option for the evacuation of the Palestinian population in Rafah, as there is nowhere else for the people to go. The United Nations Secretary General has stated unequivocally that a large-scale military assault against Rafah would exponentially increase what is already a humanitarian nightmare with untold regional consequences. The United Nations Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territories occupied since 1967 has starkly warned that the risk of a massacre of unparalleled scale looms on the horizon. UNICEF has urgently highlighted the need for Gaza's last remaining hospitals, shelters, markets and water systems, which are in Rafah, to stay functional, underscoring that without them, hunger and disease will skyrocket, taking more child lives. The Commissioner General of UNRWA, referring to the growing panic in Rafah, has made clear that any large-scale military operation amongst this population can only lead to an additional layer of endless tragedy that's unfolding, reiterating that a military offensive in the middle of these completely exposed, vulnerable people is a recipe for disaster, to the extent that he is almost becoming wordless, not knowing how to describe this. UNOCHA has pleaded that we must do everything possible within our power to avoid the large-scale loss of civilian lives, to which intensified hostilities in Rafah could lead. The Republic of South Africa is gravely concerned that the unprecedented military offensive against Rafah, as announced by the State of Israel, has already led to and will result in further large-scale killing. Harm and destruction is serious and irreparable breach both of the Genocide Convention and of the Court's order of 26th of January 2024. Accordingly, and having regard to the situation of extreme urgency, the Republic of South Africa respectfully requests that the Court exceptionally consider exercising its power under Article 75.1 of the Rules of the Court. Article 75.1 provides that the Court may at any time decide to examine proprio motu whether the circumstances of the case require the indication of provisional measures which ought to be taken or complied with by any or all of the parties. South Africa thus respectfully calls upon the Court to consider as a matter of the greatest urgency whether the developing circumstances in Rafah require that it exercise its power under Article 75.1 of the Rules of the Court to prevent further imminent breach of the rights of Palestinians in Gaza. South Africa also reserves its own rights to take further action in respect of the situation. The whole thing is 3 pages long and available on the ICJ website if you care to read it all and pick through all of it yourself. South Africa set out the importance of quick action very well in their submission here, I thought. More and more people, I think, are gaining an appreciation for just how good the South African legal team are. But the important thing to note here is that invocation of Rule of Court Article 75.1. The Court may at any time decide to examine proprio motu whether the circumstances of the case require the indication of provisional measures which ought to be taken or complied with by any or all of the parties. Proprio motu means on its own impulse, and means the Court can act to put emergency new orders in place without the need for another hearing, as we observed last month. And of course there isn't time for that. With the comments of Netanyahu being used as evidence once again, blatant and compelling as that once again is, it seems entirely reasonable to assume the Court would view said comments just as seriously now as they did before. And of course their decision-making proprio motu also takes into account the observable actions taking place here and now, and since their initial ruling on January 26th. I can see additional orders being made specific to Rafah. I can see Israel ignoring them again. So what is the point of all this then? Well, for one, it tells the people of Gaza that someone is on their side, that international law is on their side, and every nation signed up to the Genocide Convention is failing in its obligations to meet those obligations by failing to act to stop Israel acting as it is against them. It is another reminder to the international community to pull their fingers out of their backsides and step up. On the other hand, the one thing the Court didn't do previously, although in effect did due to the interim orders being impossible to deliver without one, which it still has within its powers to order, is a ceasefire, to order Israel to stop immediately. Now the Court didn't overtly make that order previously, and the reason they didn't was because of Israel's right to defend itself. Here, it's different, I think. South Africa have made this emergency request specifically in relation to Rafah. The self-defense premise, in my view, doesn't wash here. It's the furthest point from the Hamas incursion on October 7th that there is in Gaza. It's the complete other end of the Gaza Strip. Not only that, virtually the entire remaining population of Gaza is huddled in the south, Half of them, as they've said in their submission, South Africa's submission, are huddled up in Rafah, all in one spot with nowhere to go. Where's their right to self-defence? Where many commentators and foreign affairs outlets rightly surmised the ICJ wouldn't order an immediate ceasefire previously on that basis of Israel's self-defence. In the case of Rafah specifically, given the nature of that area there, the number of people there now, I think that could change. I definitely think it should change. You have to bear in mind, if you cast your mind back to the overarching tenet of the South African case, the gist of it all, it was centred around creating conditions for life that are incompatible with life. That was their accusation against Israel. Nowhere now is that more starkly obvious than in Rafah, with so many people trapped there, absolutely nowhere else for them to go. If the ICJ doesn't feel it is in a position to order a complete ceasefire in Israel, it could in relation to that one place, Rafah. Israel could complain all it likes, moaning that the ICJ are stopping them from taking out Hamas. But given the impunity they take out civilians too whilst purporting to do so, the justification is there. On the day South Africa filed this emergency request, Israel destroyed 14 houses and 3 mosques in Rafah, killing dozens in the process. We see similar night after night after night, and as much as I'm hoping for a quick and strong response from the ICJ, I can't help but think about how screwed we are as a species if it's only South Africa prepared to stand up and be counted, to stand for just basic humanity now. And so many other nations would rather be complicit in it. What actually does it say about each and every one of us that we keep voting these people into power to carry on? Of course, there's every risk that Israel might just blow the crossing and let everyone in Rafah flee into Egypt, ICJ order or not. Certainly a big concern of Egypt's right now is they're threatening to suspend the 45-year peace treaty between themselves and Israel if they do. The price Israel is prepared to pay in order to rid itself of the Palestinians of Gaza? Would you bet against it? Find out all about that story on this video recommendation here, and I'll hope to catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.